Joining us for a little bit is State Representative Cedroc Glover. Hey, Mr. Ced, how are you today?
Good morning, Robert. How you doing?
So a big meeting today. Is the meeting in Monroe or Baton Rouge? It was originally scheduled for here. Am I right about that?
You are correct. It was originally scheduled for here, postponed twice due to Hurricane Harvey, and now this morning in Monroe.
Okay, so it's it's the governor and a whole bunch of regional politicos, yourself included. Tell us what you're going to discuss, or is there really going to be discussion? Is the governor just going to tell you how it is?
Well, we hope there will be discussion, and we hope that the governor will listen. We hope that this is a meeting that the governor intends to actually have a real constructive dialogue, and he intends to listen to the vast majority of legislators from both Shreveport and Monroe, that we're not simply engaging in what someone has already referred to as a formality, and that the governor will actually see the merits of this situation, understand the unfairness that he has now become a part of, and put us in a position to gain some sense of parity for Shreveport, Monroe, and all of North Louisiana.
So what we're talking about is the meeting later today, and the foregone conclusion to which you refer is Biomedical Research Foundation being replaced as the management, as the operators of University Hospital here in Shreveport. Now,
Robert, remember the state came back in 2015. LSU and King Alexander and all those folks under the Jindal regime attempted the same thing. Went to court at that time. It was before I returned back to the legislature. And we see here now, 2+ years later, that BRF is still in place. So we're trying to address this without having to be litigious. We're trying to address this based on the merits by putting in place some different types of viewpoints and perspectives that can help us avoid, if you'll remember, going back to the spring of 2016 when you and I talked about this, when I said, with a little bit of hyperbole, but only a little bit, that there's a plot to try and kill Shreveport in North Louisiana. Well, that has become plainly clear now to lots of folks in the year plus that's passed. We see now that LSU Shreveport, the University Health Medical Center here in Shreveport, gets 32 cents for every dollar in funding that goes to the University Medical Center in New Orleans. Yet we treat twice as many people, produce twice as much revenue, and end up with twice better outcomes for only 1/3 of the money. There's a problem there, Robert, and apparently the governor and others seem to think it's our fault for not demanding more money for University Health and LSU Medical School here in Shreveport. Well, I can't speak for anybody else. You know very well that I have been one of those folks who's been advocating for fairness, for parity, and for increased funding for the situation here in Shreveport.
Okay, you know that we've had Senator Greg Tarver on a number of times, and he is adamant in his stance that the problems with the hospital, with the system, is that Biomedical Research Foundation is the root of the difficulty, and if they were replaced, things would be better. Is he incorrect, and where do the problems lie?
He's absolutely incorrect, and you go back to discover the problems based upon what I just shared with you. One of the biggest complaints that the senator comes on and shouts out to you guys is BRF is not paying their bills, but University Health is not paying their bills. Well, when you put them in the situation and circumstances that they're in right now, it does, in fact, make cash flow a bit difficult. Let's start with what we just talked about. Give me 31 cents for every dollar you give New Orleans. Who's going to be in a better position from a cash standpoint to be able to take care of the issues and challenges and obligations that they have? Put us in a situation where you're paying everybody else on a monthly basis, or on a lump sum basis, rather. You're paying us on a month-to-month basis, and you haven't paid us since June of this year. You add it all up in terms of what BRF and University Health owes to the state and what the state owes back to BRF, then you've got BRF that's ahead in that process by more than almost $10 million. So, yes, we're talking about a situation where fundamentally Shreveport, Monroe, North Louisiana is being asked to do the same thing that our neighbors to the south are being able to do. The folks down there are being given $1. We're being given 31 cents. You tell me how that's a fair set of circumstances for anyone to be expected to effectively perform under. Yet, despite that, the folks with Biomedical Research Foundation, BRF, and University Health and the outstanding employees there have done just that.
I don't mean this. This just popped into my head like 15 seconds ago, and I don't mean it to sound like the gotcha question it's going to sound like. But, and you and I have talked a number of times, and you have put forth the theory for a long time about this either spoken or unspoken conspiracy by South Louisiana politicians, businesses, etc., that there's a plot against North Louisiana. Is Senator Tarver aware of that in your mind, and is he part of that? I can't imagine that's the case.
Well, I can't speak to Senator Tarver or his motivations. All I know is that what we have here is a glaring set of circumstances where it is abundantly clear for those of us who are elected legislators from North Louisiana, where we're bringing home collectively. Now, I'm not on the Monies Committee. Senator Tarver, Representative Bagley, they happen to be. But I also stood up and voted last year against both the General Appropriations Bill and the Supplemental Appropriations Bill because they did not include enough funding for Shreveport, Monroe, and North Louisiana. So what we're saying is that collectively as a group of legislators, we are failing to deliver for the folks who have entrusted us to go to Baton Rouge and fight for them and for the institutions that we represent. We're bringing home 31 cents for every dollar that's going to New Orleans, not for completely different tasks, responsibilities, and obligations, but for the exact same ones. It's a safety net hospital that's a part of a medical school, so it's a teaching hospital, part of a combined academic medical center, same as what we have here in Shreveport. It's the same exact tasks, same exact responsibilities, except they get $1, we get 31 cents.
So what's going to
2016 budget again.
What's going to happen today with the meeting with legislators from this area and the governor is, in fact, the deal done? Is Biomedical Research Foundation, say, as of 5 o'clock today, are they going to be history?
Well, I think there's going to be some effort, probably on this governor, to make yet another unwise move. I think, though, he is going to be met with resistance, just as there was resistance in 2015 to the efforts on the part of Bobby Jindal and his cohorts. That's going to be resistance here. Again, I think that Senator Tarver and those who may follow him and his advocacy on this issue happen to be in the minority with regard to the totality of the Shreveport Monroe legislative delegations. We see the games that are being played here. We do not intend to allow ourselves to end up not effectively representing the interests of Shreveport, Monroe, and North Louisiana. We're going to demand that we get the appropriate amount of resources directed towards institutions that are the backbone of a substantial part of this region's economy, and that's helping to provide quality medical care for a population of folks who otherwise wouldn't have it available to them. So we believe that we're here fighting the great fight for all the right reasons, and we're going to stand up, look the governor in his eye, look Senator Tarver in his eye, and anybody else who stands on the other side, tell them what we believe the Lord loves, and that's the truth. And we're going to stand up and stand on the principles of advocating for greater parity for Shreveport, Monroe, and North Louisiana. If
you and me and everybody could get in our little time machine and go back X number of years, was Governor Jindal's idea to privatize all the charity hospitals in the state, was that just a bad idea?
Well, I think that the way in which it has been executed has been poorly done. It's hard to deny that by engaging in this process, there's not been some efficiencies gained. That's one of the areas where I've grown with regard to my perspective on this. It's hard to discount in terms of being able to infuse into what had been a long standing, rather stiff and bureaucratic set of ways of doing business that you've now infused into that some of the dynamics of the private sector, and that's a good thing. But certainly in terms of the way in which it was executed, it was poorly done.
Was that privatization, in your mind, part of the big picture plot to get our medical school?
I think, and at this point, I think that was simply a part of Bobby Jindal's agenda in terms of trying to position himself to run for president, to be able to say that I privatized health care in Louisiana. I have moved some 30-plus thousand former state employees off of the state payrolls, and that all sounded like a great talking point when you were going to New Hampshire and to Iowa. And because he needed it to happen in a time frame that led up to the 2016 presidential race, he did not take the necessary and proper time to ensure that every one of these situations ended up being managed and transitioned in the proper and effective way. That's why I ended up with BRF having to step into the breach at the last minute to be that institution that was willing to accept this responsibility and to move forward and to facilitate it. And in hindsight, I think they've done an excellent job.